A couple have asked to see my workshop and what I've got in it. This is the outside. It's half block, half tin on one side, and then a quick extension was put on later of all tin. The biggest problem with this is, being Ireland when it's always raining, condensation. So all the machines end up with a film of surface rust on them. Most annoying, but can easily be wiped off when you're required. As we go inside, we have my homemade powder coating oven. There's a video on this in the collection. My sandblaster. Again, most sandblasting is done outside for the big stuff, frames, tanks and such. This is my engine building bench with a parts washer beside it. An old forge I haven't used in years, that's the anvil, with an old bantam frame laying up against it, and behind it the actual forge unit. This is a furnace for melting aluminium and casting. Again, something I shall be doing in the near future. I'll put a video up about that. My hydraulic press, homemade, using a cheap Porter Power kit that I bought years ago. Pipe bending equipment. This is a simple plumber's pipe bender, and this is the hydraulic one that I use for bending exhaust pipes and such, frame tubes, stuff like that. This is my second lathe that I ever bought. It's an old Holbrook made in 1907 and was originally a treadle lathe. It's still the mainstay of the workshop whenever I have to cut weird screw threads or weird machining. A beautiful machine. Archdale horizontal mill. Two filing cabinets full of all the tools and equipment that you need to run these machines. Measuring, cutting, everything. On this side of the shed we have a shaper and two surface grinders. Haven't used them much, no need for them at the moment. Another Victorian machine, a drill press converted to electricity, originally ran off a line shaft. Here we have a cut-off saw and an old drill press, which will be renovated one day. It was good in its day, but it needs a bit of work. Power hacksaw, belt linisher. The old aluminium heads down there for cutting up and used in the castings. On the bench we have a fly press, another sander, and one of those 3-in-1 form tools with slip rolls. Here is an engraver, Taylor Hobson engraver, and another pillar drill. And on the end of the bench is the grinding and polishing and a bandsaw. This was the first little pillar drill I ever bought. It's been with me for about 30 years. Beside it is a filing machine. This is the Drummond round bed. It's the same as the very first lathe I ever bought for 60 quid from the Bewley Auto Jumble. I sold it to a good friend, so it went to a good home, but I always regretted it. And when this one turned up cheap, I had to get it. A general view of the end of the workshop. You can see racks with nuts and bolts, drills, all sorts of stuff. Then we go to the Archdale vertical mill, 1950s, something like that. And then the mainstay of the workshop itself, a Dean and Smith and Grace lathe of, again, 1950s vintage. Considered a very high quality machine in its day. This is a Victorian tool cutter grinder, a scary machine to use, and I always armour myself before I use it. Another view of the Archdale milling machine, another mainstay of the workshop. This is a boring bar. It's not a Van Norman, it actually uses hydraulics to introduce the cutter into the bore, but a very useful machine nonetheless. Moving into the back half of the workshop, we have a homemade lift table where I do most of the work on the heavier bikes. A welding station with an AC/DC TIG, a little DC TIG underneath. The proverbial toolboxes with all assortment of spanners, pliers, whatever you need, collected over years. A rear view of a drill press next to the newest addition to the workshop, a little Chester lathe. Just a general view from the back of the workshop, showing the vise, and the little Chester. For the price I paid for it, an excellent little machine, very good for cutting metric threads. Another view of the toolboxes. The messy end of the workshop. Buried in there is the blue metal folder I use for sheet metal folding. This is a frame jig I made for when I was into building chopper frames. A homemade sandblasting cabinet. It's not quite finished yet. I've problems with the extraction, so I'm going to end up making a snail extractor for it. Only 18 years in the making. And a homemade wheeling machine for when I make petrol tanks for the choppers. And lastly, the paint booth, a 6x4 shed tacked on the end, just big enough for motorbike stuff. There's a homemade extractor unit on one end, an ex-war department unit adapted with cooker hood filters to clean the air up before it goes out into the wide world, and two sealed fluorescent light units in the ceiling to help with the spraying. And there we have it, a quick tour of the workshop. Every machine was bought at scrap value at a time when everybody was changing over to CNC machines in the 70s, and every machine has a story behind it, how I got it home, how it was assembled, and all sorts of manners of bits and bobs that have been collected over the years to use on the machines. Some of them came with no handles, and again just made handles by me. It's always been a passion of mine that the old ways of doing things should be kept alive, and hopefully with this sort of machinery still going and still working well, we can keep it up. Hope you enjoyed the tour, and thanks for watching.